All right, guys, welcome back to the 6th part of our RPG series. So far, the support has been great, and let's keep it rolling. So in this episode, we're going to be looking at refactoring our code and just give me a minute. Yeah, so in this episode, we're going to be looking at restructuring how our code is working, just to make it more readable, more maintainable, and everything. So this is what we're going to be going for. We're going to have the highest level of a script, which is the player controller. So it's going to contain all our controls, everything from inputs and everything. Then it's going to talk to these two scripts here and all the other scripts that we'll create. So everything will be talked to through the player controller. So if we've got an interaction script for interactable objects, it will talk to the player controller. Everything will be talking to the player controller, and then we'll have modular scripts that will be independent, and then they can also, all they have to do is receive inputs from the player controller. From there, it will go to our locomotion script, which it will pass input information to our locomotion script, and also input information into our weapon management script. And then these two scripts on all the other scripts which require the animator controller will then talk to the animator controller on their own. So the animator controller will have controls for locomotion, for weapon stuff, for everything. As long as it requires an animator controller, it will be there. And so for right now, since this is what we have going, this is what we're going to try and create here. All right. Okay, just we do a cutaway and then we get into our project in Unity. Okay, so here we are in our project, and in this project we're going to just make a few changes to how our scripts are currently working. So if we go into the player controls and into our scripts, we're not going to put it in any of this. We're just going to create a new script here, just right here in the root folder of our scripts. And we're going to call it player controller or character controller or whatever you feel like calling it. Okay? So, well, we already have a player controller script. Okay. Let's delete that. Right, I'm going to, you guys can call it player controller. I'm going to call it character controller. It seems like I already created a script or testing. So I'm going to call it character controller, which is going to be our, what is going on here? Am I missing something? Let me see. Delete that. So we'll apply locomotion and animator controller. We'll have weapon manager. Let me just do something here. I'll go into my debug. Input player controller should be this one. So this is player controls. Come on, I need to be able to see here. Yeah, so this is the player controller script. So I'm just gonna delete the whole debug folder because it's giving me a bit of problems. I'll be working in another project for testing. So, okay, so we're going to come to this root folder here, create a new script, call it player controller. If you already have it script by that name, call it whatever name you want to call it, but I'm calling it that because it's going to be our main player controller script. So we're going to open that script up, and then this script is going to need a few things. So remember how I said it's going to be the main script, so it's going to need references to our other scripts. So we'll put our serialized field here and call it player locomotion, and I'll call it locomotion. And then we're also going to need a reference to our weapon management. So weapon manager. All right. So we're going to need those two references there. And then we're also going to need a reference to our player controls, the actual controls, so character controls, character control. Since I've changed the name because I was having an issue, so we're going to need a reference to this guy here. So if yours are called player controls, put player controls instead of character controls. But mine are called character controls, so I'm going to put character controls, character controls. So here's what we're going to do now. Inside this player control script, we're going to have a new function here that we haven't used yet called the awake. So what the awake function does is that it runs while the actual script is being initialized. So right before the script gets initialized, that's when the awake function runs, and then the start function runs at the first script when the object has been initialized. So in this case, we're going to now say character controls is equal to, inside the awake, we're going to say it's equal to new character controls, like that. So initially, we're going to be trying to do what we were doing inside of our locomotion. So this part here, we're not going to do it here. So we're going to do it in the player controller. So we're going to copy this whole thing. We don't need to rewrite it. We can just copy it and bring it over here and paste it. So let's actually then name this the same name so that we do not have issues. So player controls, and even here player controls. So now once this is called, we're going to call functions from the two different scripts. So in this case, we are going to actually, let's see. So onto the void, and let's do the start first. Let's copy this. Let's copy that, put it just at the bottom here so that we have it below the start and update functions. So in the start function, we need now to initialize these two variables. So we're going to say locomotion is equal to get component player locomotion, and then the weapon manager is equals to get component weapon manager, like that. So before the start function, the awake function is called. So in the very first function, we're going to call the player controls and initialize them. Then in the start function, we're going to call the weapon manager and the locomotion and initialize them as well. So now when we're going to the on enable, we shall assume that it won't be null. We shall assume that it won't be null at that point because it will have already been initialized in awake, but I'll leave it like that for just the null reference. Then what we're going to say is we're going to give it two new functions. So we do not actually need the update function because we don't need the update function. So let's just come here and say we're going to have two functions, one for the actual locomotion. So this will be a private void. So it doesn't return anything. A private void handle move input. So we have to pass a move input into our locomotion for our locomotion to keep working. So we're going to now say this as an input action. Input action. Then it's going to be input action dot the callback context. And then we need to give it a parameter name. So let's just call it context here. Okay, so we're going to be getting a callback to our input actions. Then we're going to now say vector2, because our movement is working on a vector2 plane, dot move input. So we do not have the move input here. We need to actually need to have it. Oh, no. We are initializing it. So vector2 move input. So it's an initialization like this. Move input is going to be equal to the context that we're just from assigning here, this context here. Then dot, what we're going to get from it is the read value as vector2. So initially we're doing this guy here, but instead of doing it like this, we're doing it here. Then we're going to say locomotion dot, we're going to have a function in there, but for now let's leave it there. Let's come and fix this part here. So here where we say movement WSD dot performed X dot, and then we go to the move input. We don't want to go there. Instead, we want to come to this function here. So we'll come and say handle move input. And then this will be performed. We do not even need that. We don't need this or that. We need it like that. So plus equal performed handle move input. So what we're telling is that once we press any of our movement buttons, handle move input should be the one that should be called. And then we're going to also have the same for the equip input. We're going to have another function here saying private void handle equip input. So at this point, we want to handle the equip input action. So it will be input action, the same. And then this time, it's going to just go directly into whatever we want to do there. So what we're going to do here is to get this out, and then we're going to say handle equip input like that. So what we are saying is that once player controls is enabled, and then we equip something, we handle equip input. And then if we say movement, we handle move input. Okay, so now that that's done, instead of the way we're doing it here where we're handling everything in locomotion, we won't need this at all. We won't need the weapon manager in here, but we'll get to that. First, let's get it sorted. So what we're going to do now is that our move player here, we're going to give him something. He's going to need to have something that we can pass. So we're going to pass in a vector 2, and then we're going to call it input, right? So now when we go to our player controller script, when we say locomotion.move player, so we do not have it as public, we need to make it public. Let's go back to our player locomotion, change this to public, because now we're calling it from another script. So public void move player. When we come to the player controller, we'll say locomotion.move player. It's going to require that vector 2 input. So we're going to pass in our move input. That beautifully done like that, and that's it for the movement. We are done. So let's put some comments here so that everybody's able to follow along nicely. So this part, we're going to say this is, we are passing the move input to our locomotion script. All right. Now, inside of the equip input, we need a reference to this guy. So what initially we're trying to do here is that we want to call right. Actually, it's in here. We want to call this equip weapon here, but then we do not want to have it here, so we're going to move it out of here, and we don't want anything to do with equipping in our locomotion, so we're going to move it into our weapon manager, and in our weapon manager we're going to put it right there. So private void weapon manager equip weapon, we're going to make it public because we're going to be calling it from a different function. Okay, so we're going to have it here, and then let me just look at my notes here. We're going to make so we're going to call inside this very function here, we're going to call equip weapon, but now since we are calling it from our very thing here, we're going to call it here. And then for our sword, let's just have the game object here. But in fact, we're going to have another script which is going to have our weapon types and weapons. So we're going to have a scriptable object for each weapon where we can give it the certain damage that it has to do. But we'll not get there now. Right now, what we're going to say is public. Do we need to be public? No, we don't. Let's make it a serialized field. Game object. Then we're going to call this our sword. Right? So now we're going to pass our sword there. And then once that is done, we're going to go into our equip weapon here, which is going to set our boolean to true. Then we are going to now start our coroutine. But here is where it's going to be different. Here's where it's going to be very, very different. So if you see here in our coroutine, we've got the animator being called in our weapon manager. We don't want that. We do not want that. What we want is our animator controller or animator script to handle everything animation related. So let's go back to our Unity project here. Let's come to our main character, player. So we're going to go to the animator controller, this script here. And then we're going to go back to our weapon manager here. We're going to get this function. We're going to get this function, copy it into the animator controller. We're going to paste it. We're going to change this to a public function so that we can access it in other functions. So public enumerator equip animation blah 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 blah, and then we're going to say animator here dot. Okay, we're calling this animator. We don't have to call the animator in every script. It will just be called here, and here we can access it to access everything else. So now we've got this problem here where our attach weapon is in our weapon manager. So we're going to cut that out. What we're going to do is to call that. Then here, where we are doing the start coroutine, right under the start coroutine, we're going to call that attach weapon. And then we're going to delete this guy. We don't need this guy anymore in this script. And it will complain, we get it. But what we're going to do now here is say, instead of the animator, we're going to say animator controller. And then we're going to get, so now this script will sit on the same level as the player controller and the locomotion. Because if you look at our player controller, we are saying get component, so they should be seated on the same object. So now, since they're seated on the same object, they're seated on the parent object of the animator. Okay, so we're going to say animator controller, get animator controller, but not get component, but get component in. Let me just write it again. So we're going to say get component in children, animator controller. Okay, because this animator controller is going to be seated on the actual object where our animator is seated. So it's going to be seated on our model. And since our model is a child of our player game object, where all these other scripts are seated, we're going to be calling get component in children on all those that require to access the animator controller. And I think our locomotion already does that. If I look closely, yes. So animator controller get component in children, animator controller is exactly what we're going to be doing here. Then, since we're no longer calling this, it's going to be a bit different the way we're going to call it. All right. So we're going to get animator dot. Okay. Let me see how our animator controller is looking. So it's got a serialized field. We're going to make this a public animator like that, so that in here we're going to say animator.animator. We're going to get the animator variable in the animator script, in the animator controller script, and then we're going to say dot set boolean, so that we still call this here. And then here it's going to be the same animator. Let's do it like that. Dot wait for equip. Okay, let's just change this. I don't like the way this is reading. It shouldn't be reading like that. It should be reading like this. So we're going to get that meter. Actually, let's do it like this so that we have a difference. Let's put a dash and underscore right at the beginning. Then we're going to do that, and do that. So now what we're saying is that, okay, from our weapon manager, call our animator script, set the boolean of equip animation, then call that to set this, then attach the weapon. That's all we are doing there. So what we have now is a modular system where the player controller is doing everything to do with the inputs. As you can see, there is nothing to do with animations here. The locomotion, move player needs an input. Okay. All right, so here's where we're gonna have a bit of a change. So just for us to make this work, let's just remove these guys. We're not using them. So we're going to have another function called public void inside the player locomotion, that is public void handle move input, and this is going to now be the one that has got the vector 2. It's going to be the one that has got the vector 2 and don't move input like that, and then it's going now to say move input, because remember we have the move input here that we're accessing it here. It's going to say move input is going to be equal to new, okay, new, we're going to say vector 3, then we're going to say input dot x, and then we're going to zero out the y, and then we're going to say input dot y. Actually, we're going to zero out the z, then we're going to say input dot y. So let's just come back here and say 0f like that. Okay, that's how we're going to now pass our move input variable that we still have there into that, and then the rest should stay the way it is. I think it will be fine. Go to our player controller. We're going to change this and call that function that we have just written right now, which is the handle move input, like that. So now our player controller will handle the move input, send the player controller will handle sending the move input value into our locomotion script, which will then use that move input value to keep our movement the way it is. And then the same player controller will send our weapon manager the input value for it to use. But for it, we're going to just do it like this. We're going to say weapon manager dot equip weapon. Okay, right, like that. So when we come to our weapon manager, it will call that. Then once it has called that, it shall start off doing this stuff here. So it will still work the same. The only difference is that instead of us calling everything from the player locomotion script, we're going to call everything from the player controller, the weapon manager scripts. So let's test this out and see if it's working. And if it's not, then we can fix it. So right on our player, we're going to slap the player controller script that we've just written right there. So we expect it to auto initialize those two, but we've got a few changes to make in terms of the weapon manager. It has got now this sword game object here. So we're going to now change it. Let's just get our sword here. Then let's go to our weapon manager, give the sword there. Then yeah, let's test it out. I think that should be it. If we've got an error, we're going to figure it out. So if we press, so we are not yet getting the inputs. That's interesting. Why aren't we getting the inputs? So let's look at what's happening inside the player controller. Okay, the player controller has worked. Weapon manager hasn't. Okay. So let's come here. Weapon manager is equals to get component weapon manager. But the problem is that our weapon manager is on the wrong object. So we're going to copy that, put it onto our player, the parent of that actual object. We're going to paste component as new, then we're going to remove it from this object. So we're going to remove that component. The animator controller is the only one that should be here. So once we come here and see, let's clear this for now. Let's hit play. Make sure that okay, everything is being filled, but we are still unable to move, we're still unable to do any of that stuff. Now, why are we unable to do any of that? Why are we unable to equip the weapon? We're unable to move around. So let's see what we've broken. Object reference not sent to an instant of an object in the player locomotion on disable. So on disable, what we're saying is player controls for disable, but the player controls, we're not using them here. So let's remove that. We're not using them in this script. Let's also remove the on disable. We're not using the weapon manager either in this script. So the weapon manager, the sword, we're not using them. Let's remove that as well. Then let's look at now this guy. What exactly isn't happening? So since we've already passed that, we don't need to pass it here. We've already coded it in the player controller. So what we're going to say is vector3 move input is equal to move direction is equal to camera forward dot, and then we're going to now pass our move input. Move input dot z. Then on this other one, we're going to pass our move input dot x. Okay, so move input dot. Why isn't my move input dot z working? Let me see. We need to change it here. We cannot keep it as a vector 2. We need to make it vector 3 so that we have x, y, and z. Then we are going to now say we don't need this anymore. We are going to change this. Don't need that anymore. Okay. Let's just come there. Control K, Control D. We're going to now say velocity dot y is equal to gravity times the delta time. And then we might not actually need this guy. All of this here, we might not actually need it anymore. Remove it. It's actually making our code a bit cleaner. Then we can say character controller dot move, move direction, move speed, velocity times time dot delta time. That should work. That should work. So let's look at our player controller again, just to make sure that we have everything working. So then we do have on enable, we don't have on disable. Let's just create private void on disable. Then we're going to get the player controls and disable them. So player controls dot disable. So I'm pretty sure we don't need this because we are already initializing them in their wake function. So we're going to enable them. We don't need this here because we've already enabled it. We don't need this here because it's already been enabled. And then okay, so we do not need anything else. Our weapon manager is fine. Our meta controller is also fine. Our locomotion looks fine. Okay. Here is where our mistake was. We are actually not enabling our player controls. So player controls dot enable. All right, now it should work because we weren't enabling our player control, so we're not receiving any input. But now we should be. Wait, what? Okay, now it's enabled, but still not sending the input. Let me see. Have I made another mistake? So we're going to say player controls dot enable. Well, we cannot enable it and then new it. That won't make sense. Sheesh, making so many mistakes. Okay, because when we knew it, that means it's not enabled anymore. Should it work? Is it going to work now? Yes, there we go. So it's still working the same. We enabled it. We were not. We were enabling it and then newing it, so it was still being not working the way it's supposed to work. For some reason, our forward animations aren't working, but our strafe animations are working. That's interesting. Let's look at our animator controller here. So inside locomotion, we've got run forward and run backward. And this is based off of our vertical being 1. Okay. So why is this not working the way we want it to work? So locomotion dot handle move input. Okay. I'm going to go into this function here. So let's look at it here. We've got move input is equals to new vector 3 input dot x 0 on the y on the z and then input dot y. So once we're done with that, we're going to go into our move player function. I'm going to say vector 3 dot move direction is equals to camera dot forward move input dot z plus camera dot right move input dot x, and then the move direction. Actually, we should probably just normalize it because we've already given it 0 at the top there, so we don't need to give it 0 here. We've already given it 0 here. So move direction dot normalize, then velocity dot y plus gravity applied by time dot delta time, and then character controller dot move direction, and then move speed velocity times time dot delta time, then rotate character. Did I change anything here? Vector 3 dot camera forward is equals to transform dot camera forward, and then we normalize it, and then if 0 rotation continue dot rotation. That's fine. Then update animator values. Okay, so we do change something here. The vertical input is no longer y because we are zeroing on y, it's now z. Okay, so let's remember that when we're updating our animator values, and save that. So that's the last change, because we changed it from a vector 2 to a vector 3. So our y is going to be zeroed out, but our z is the one that's going to take our vector 3 input. So if we hit play here, move forward it moves, move backwards it moves, though we need to work on it moving upward. When we move backward, we'll do that in in the next one. But yeah, so it's still working the same way that it was working before, but it's much better structured. We have one script that is handling all of our inputs, and then our local motion is handling the local motion stuff. Our weapon manager is going to be handling our weapon equipping stuff, which we haven't tested. Let's just test it out here. There we go. It gets equipped, though we have to delay it a bit more, because from what I saw there, it got equipped pretty quickly right before the animation actually started playing. All right, so this is where we're going to end this one. If you enjoyed it, leave a like, comment, subscribe if you're new to the channel, and I'll see you all in the next one. It's going.